Ultimate Adventure Redefined, Ford Everest 2026 Official Reveal. The Ford Everest 2026 is here to dominate the SUV world with its bold new design, advanced technology, and unmatched off-road capability. Experience power, luxury, and innovation all in one, built for adventure, designed for comfort. Join us as we explore every detail, feature, and performance upgrade of this next-generation SUV. Ford Everest 2026 Full Review and Walkaround. New Ford Everest 2026 Exterior and Interior Design. 2026 Ford Everest Engine, Specs, and Performance. Ford Everest 2026 Off-Road Test and Features. All new Ford Everest 2026 vs Toyota Fortuner 2026 Comparison. Ford Everest 2026 Top Features you must know. Next-Gen Ford Everest 2026 Interior Luxury Details. Ford Everest 2026 Real-World Driving Experience. Ford Everest 2026 Release Date and Price Details. Ford Everest 2026 Technology and Safety Innovations. Ford Everest 2026 New Ford Everest Ford Everest 2026 Ford Everest Review Ford Everest Interior Ford Everest Design Ford Everest Launch Everest 2026 Review Ford Everest Off-Road Ford Everest Features SUV 2026 Ford Adventure Next Gen Everest Everest Power. Ford Everest 2026, New Ford Everest, Ford SUV, 2026 Ford Everest, Everest 2026 Review, Ford Everest Specs, Ford Everest Design, Everest 2026 Interior, Ford Everest Engine, Ford Everest Off-Road, Ford Everest vs Fortuner, Ford Everest Price, Ford Everest Features, Ford Everest Launch, Ford Everest Comparison, 2026 SUV Review, Ford Everest Performance, Ford Next General SUV, Ford Everest Technology, Everest SUV 2026. Ford Everest 2026 Review, New Ford Everest 2026, Ford Everest Interior 2026, Ford Everest Engine Specs, Ford Everest 2026 Price, Ford Everest 2026 Launch Date, Ford Everest 2026 Off-Road Test, Ford Everest 2026 vs Toyota Fortuner, Ford Everest 2026 Design, Ford Everest 2026 Performance, Ford Everest Next Generation, Ford Everest 2026 Full Details, Ford Everest 2026 Technology, Ford Everest 2026 Features, Ford Everest 2026 Overview, Ford Everest 2026 SUV, Ford Everest 2026 Luxury Interior, Ford Everest 2026 Powertrain, Ford Everest 2026 Safety Features, Ford Everest 2026 Updates.